The students buried a kitten alive, but what their 64-year-old teacher did next changed everything. The late August sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Havenwood, Iowa. A quintessential small town, Havenwood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where Friday night football games were the highlight of the week, and where the pace of life moved a little slower. At the heart of the town stood Havenwood Elementary, a 2-story brick building that had seen generations of children pass through its doors. Inside one of those classrooms, Miss Abigail Peterson was arranging name tags on small wooden desks. Her hands, gnarled with age and countless hours of grading papers, moved with a practiced efficiency. At 64, Abigail was on the cusp of retirement, this semester being her last. 40 years she'd spent in this very room, shaping young minds, nurturing a love for learning, and offering a comforting presence to children from all walks of life. Abigail smoothed a stray strand of her silver hair, which she wore in a neat bun. Her face, etched with the lines of time and experience, held a gentle kindness, particularly around her eyes, a soft, cornflower blue that seemed to radiate warmth. She wore a simple, floral dress, a cardigan draped over her shoulders despite the lingering summer heat. She was a picture of old-fashioned grace, a comforting figure in a rapidly changing world. But beneath the calm exterior, Abigail felt a tremor of unease. Retirement loomed, a vast, unknown territory. She dedicated her life to teaching. It was her identity, her purpose. What would she do with herself when the school bell no longer dictated the rhythm of her days? Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 5 years ago, a quiet, gentle man who had shared her love for books and nature. Their only child, Emily, lived on the West Coast, a successful lawyer with a busy life of her own. Abigail loved Emily dearly, but their visits were infrequent, phone calls often rushed. The house, once filled with laughter and the comforting clutter of family life, now felt echoing and empty. She glanced around the classroom, her gaze lingering on the colorful posters, the alphabet chart, the small library tucked into a corner. Each object held a memory, a story. She'd seen shy kindergartners blossom into confident fifth graders, witnessed countless aha moments and comforted tears over scraped knees and lost pets. A soft sigh escaped her lips. She was tired, there was no denying it. The endless paperwork, the increasing demands of standardized testing, the growing disconnect between the curriculum and the real needs of her students, it all weighed on her. Yet, the thought of leaving this place, of severing this connection, filled her with a profound sadness. "Miss Peterson?" A small voice startled her. She turned to see a young boy, Timothy, standing hesitantly in the doorway. He was one of her new fourth graders, a small, freckled boy with wide, anxious eyes. "Timothy, welcome," Abigail said, her voice softening. Come in. You're early." "My mom had to go to work," he mumbled, clutching a lunchbox decorated with superheroes. "Well, you can pick any desk you like," Abigail said, gesturing around the room. "Make yourself comfortable." As Timothy tentatively chose a desk near the window, Abigail felt a familiar surge of warmth. This was what she would miss the most, the children. Their innocence, their curiosity, their boundless capacity for love and learning. It was a privilege, she realized, to have played a part in their lives, to have helped shape them into the people they would become. The bell rang, signaling the official start of the school day. Children began to flood into the classroom, a cacophony of chatter and laughter. Abigail greeted each one by name, her practiced eye noting the subtle shifts in their demeanor since the previous year. Some were taller, some had new haircuts, some carried the quiet weight of summer troubles on their young shoulders. Among them was Mark, a tall, lanky boy with a defiant swagger. Abigail knew Mark's home life was difficult. His parents were struggling with unemployment and addiction. He often acted out, seeking attention in negative ways. Then there was Sarah, a quiet, thoughtful girl with long brown hair. She was often overshadowed by the more boisterous children, but Abigail saw a deep well of empathy in her eyes. And finally, Billy, a small, sensitive boy who loved animals. He was often teased for his gentle nature, but Abigail admired his unwavering kindness. As she looked at their faces, a renewed determination filled her. This was her last semester. She would make it count. She would give these children her best, impart to them not just knowledge, but also the values of compassion, empathy, and respect. She had no idea that an unexpected, heartbreaking event would soon provide her with the most powerful teaching opportunity of her career. The playground, a sprawling expanse of asphalt and grass, was alive with the chaotic energy of recess. Children shrieked and laughed, chasing each other in games of tag, their voices blending with the rhythmic squeak of the swings and the thud of basketballs. In a quieter corner, near a sandy area used for long jump practice, a small ginger kitten huddled, trembling. It was no bigger than a child's hand, its fur matted and dusty, its eyes wide with fear. It had likely wandered onto the school grounds from a nearby farm, lured by the promise of food or shelter. Mark, along with a few of his friends, spotted the kitten. "Hey, look! A stray!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the playground. The other boys gathered around, their initial curiosity quickly turning into something more predatory. Mark, emboldened by the attention, picked up a handful of sand. "Let's see if it likes to play," he sneered, tossing the sand at the kitten. The kitten hissed, arching its back, its tiny claws extended. It tried to run, but the boys surrounded it, blocking its escape. Sarah, watching from a distance, felt a knot of unease in her stomach. She didn't like seeing the kitten being harassed, but she was afraid to speak up, afraid of being targeted by Mark and his friends. Billy, however, couldn't stand idly by. He pushed his way through the circle of boys. "Leave it alone, Mark," he pleaded. "It's just a baby." Mark scoffed. "What are you going to do about it, crybaby?" He grabbed the kitten by the scruff of its neck, holding it up in the air. The kitten mewled piteously, its legs dangling helplessly. "Put it down," Billy cried, trying to grab Mark's arm. But Mark was stronger, and he easily shoved Billy away. Billy stumbled and fell, scraping his knee. The other boys laughed, their cruelty fueled by Mark's dominance. An idea, born of a twisted sense of fun, began to form in Mark's mind. He looked at the sandpit, then back at the struggling kitten. "Let's bury it," he said, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Just for a little while. It'll be funny." The other boys, caught up in the mob mentality, eagerly agreed. Sarah, her heart pounding, wanted to scream, to run for a teacher, but she was paralyzed by fear. She watched in silent horror as Mark dug a shallow hole in the sand. He dropped the kitten into the hole, then began to pile sand around it, burying it up to its neck. The kitten struggled frantically, its cries muffled by the sand. Only its head remained visible, its terrified eyes blinking in the bright sunlight. The boys laughed, admiring their handiwork. "It looks like a little furry mole," one of them giggled. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. The children, their attention spans short, quickly forgot about the buried kitten. They lined up, eager to return to the classroom, their minds already on the afternoon's lessons. Mark, wiping his sandy hands on his pants, gave the kitten one last, dismissive look. "We'll come back for it later," he said, though he had no real intention of doing so. The playground emptied, leaving only the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The kitten, trapped and alone, continued to struggle, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Its cries, weak and desperate, were lost in the vast emptiness of the schoolyard. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows, the kitten's hope dwindled. It was a small, fragile creature, forgotten and abandoned in a world that seemed indifferent to its suffering. The school was quiet now, the boisterous energy of the day replaced by a hushed stillness. Miss Abigail sat at her desk, a stack of ungraded math tests in front of her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the empty classroom. She rubbed her tired eyes, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders. Another long day, another step closer to the end. She tried to focus on the tests, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about retirement, about the empty house that awaited her, about the long, quiet evenings stretching ahead. A wave of loneliness washed over her, a feeling she'd been battling ever since Thomas passed away. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, broke through her thoughts. She paused, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, high-pitched mewling. It seemed to be coming from outside. Curiosity piqued. Abigail rose from her desk and walked to the window. She peered out into the darkening schoolyard, but saw nothing. The sound came again, more insistent this time. It was definitely a cat, and it sounded distressed. Abigail grabbed her cardigan and her keys, a sense of urgency growing within her. She hurried out of the classroom, down the empty hallway, and out the back door of the school. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. She followed the sound, her steps quickening as the mewling grew louder. It led her to the edge of the playground, near the sandpit. She scanned the area, her heart pounding in her chest, and then she saw it. A small, ginger head, barely visible above the sand. Two terrified, blue eyes staring up at her. A tiny, desperate cry escaping from its throat. Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She rushed to the kitten, dropping to her knees beside it. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She carefully began to dig, her fingers working frantically to clear the sand away from the kitten's body. The sand was packed tightly, and the kitten whimpered in pain as she brushed against its delicate fur. Tears welled up in Abigail's eyes, a mixture of anger and pity overwhelming her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she had freed the kitten. She gently scooped it up in her hands, holding it close to her chest. It was so small, so fragile, its body trembling violently. It was covered in sand, its fur matted and damp. Abigail cradled the kitten, stroking its head softly. "It's all right, little one," she murmured. "You're safe now. You're safe." The kitten, exhausted and terrified, burrowed into her embrace, seeking warmth and comfort. Abigail stood up, still holding the kitten, and looked around the empty schoolyard. The anger she'd felt earlier returned, stronger now. How could anyone do this? How could anyone be so cruel? She knew she couldn't leave the kitten here. It needed care, it needed warmth, it needed love. She made a decision. She would take it home. Her house, a small, cozy bungalow on the edge of town, was filled with the comforting clutter of a life well lived. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with well-worn volumes. Family photos adorned the mantelpiece, capturing moments of joy and laughter. The air was filled with the faint scent of lavender and old paper. Abigail carefully placed the kitten on a soft towel on the kitchen counter. She filled a small bowl with warm milk and offered it to the kitten. It lapped at the milk hungrily, its tiny tongue working furiously. As the kitten ate, Abigail examined it more closely. It was a male, she determined, and incredibly young, probably no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. It was thin, its ribs visible beneath its matted fur. But despite its ordeal, it had a spark of resilience in its eyes. She found an old shoebox and lined it with soft blankets, creating a makeshift bed for the kitten. She placed the box near the fireplace where it would be warm and sheltered. The kitten, after finishing its milk, curled up in the box and promptly fell asleep. Abigail watched it, her heart aching with compassion. She thought of her students, of the children who had done this. She couldn't understand their cruelty, but she knew she couldn't simply condemn them. She had to teach them, to show them a better way. She decided then and there that this incident would become a lesson, a powerful lesson in empathy and responsibility. She would use this kitten, this tiny, vulnerable creature, to open their hearts and minds. She looked at the sleeping kitten, its tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically. A name came to her unbidden. "Rusty," she whispered. "I'll call you Rusty." The name felt right. It suited the kitten's ginger fur, and it also hinted at the resilience she saw in its spirit. Rusty, a survivor, a symbol of hope. As Abigail sat by the fireplace, watching Rusty sleep, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. The loneliness that had been weighing her down seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed determination. She had a mission now, not just to care for this kitten, but to teach her students the true meaning of compassion. Her last semester, she realized, might just be her most important one yet. The next morning, Abigail arrived at school early, Rusty nestled securely in a carrier at her feet. She'd spent a restless night, tending to the kitten and thinking about how best to approach the situation with her students. She knew she couldn't simply scold them. She needed to reach them on a deeper level, to help them understand the consequences of their actions. As the children filed into the classroom, their eyes widened in surprise at the sight of the carrier. Whispers rippled through the room. "What's that? Is it a cat? Did Miss Peterson get a pet?" Abigail waited until everyone was seated. Then she took a deep breath. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice calm but firm. "As you can see, I have a special guest with us today." She carefully opened the carrier and lifted Rusty out. The kitten, still a bit shy, blinked in the bright light of the classroom. A collective went up from the children. Abigail held Rusty gently, allowing the children to see him. "This is Rusty," she said. "He's a very young kitten, and he had a very difficult experience yesterday." She proceeded to tell them the story, her voice filled with emotion. She described finding Rusty buried in the sand, his fear, his vulnerability. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but she made it clear that this was an act of cruelty, an act that had caused immense suffering to a helpless creature. The children listened in stunned silence. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Abigail's gaze. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her guilt overwhelming her. Billy, who had tried to help Rusty, looked relieved that the kitten was safe. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," Abigail continued. "I'm telling you this because I want you to learn something. I want you to understand that all living creatures deserve our respect and compassion. Even the smallest, most vulnerable creatures have feelings. They feel pain, they feel fear, they feel loneliness." She held Rusty up again, stroking his soft fur. "Rusty is lucky. He survived. But many animals aren't so lucky. Many animals are abandoned, abused, and neglected. They suffer in silence because they can't speak for themselves." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We have a responsibility to protect those who are weaker than us. We have a responsibility to be kind, to be compassionate, to be empathetic." She then introduced a new unit of study, focusing on animal welfare. She showed them pictures of rescued animals, told them stories of animal shelters and rescue organizations. She explained the importance of spaying and neutering pets, of adopting instead of buying from breeders, of reporting animal abuse. But the most powerful part of the lesson was Rusty himself. Abigail allowed the children to interact with him, under her close supervision. They took turns gently petting him, feeding him with a small bottle, and playing with him using soft toys. Mark, initially hesitant, eventually approached Rusty. He reached out a tentative hand and stroked the kitten's fur. Rusty, surprisingly, purred and rubbed against Mark's hand. A small smile flickered across Mark's face, a genuine smile that Abigail hadn't seen in a long time. Sarah, overwhelmed with remorse, confessed to Abigail that she had seen what happened but had been too afraid to speak up. Abigail comforted her, assuring her that it was okay to be afraid, but that it was important to find the courage to do what's right. Billy, beaming with pride, told Abigail about his love for animals and his dream of becoming a veterinarian. Abigail encouraged him, telling him that he had a special gift for connecting with animals. Over the next few weeks, the classroom transformed. The children became passionate advocates for animal welfare. They created posters about responsible pet ownership, wrote stories about rescued animals, and even started a small collection of pet food and supplies to donate to a local shelter. Abigail watched this transformation with a growing sense of satisfaction. She had taken a terrible incident and turned it into a powerful learning experience. She had planted seeds of compassion in her students' hearts, seeds that she hoped would blossom and grow throughout their lives. Rusty, the tiny, forgotten kitten, had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of hope and redemption. Miss Abigail's lessons extended far beyond the confines of the classroom walls. The incident with Rusty and the children's enthusiastic response had ignited a spark within her. She realized that she could do more, that she could make a real difference in the lives of animals in her community. She began researching local animal shelters and rescue organizations. She discovered that Havenwood, despite its idyllic appearance, had a significant problem with stray and abandoned animals. The existing county shelter was overcrowded and underfunded, struggling to cope with the constant influx of unwanted pets. Then she stumbled upon a small, privately run rescue called Havenwood Haven. It was located on the outskirts of town, on a small farm owned by a woman named Eleanor Reynolds. Intrigued, Abigail decided to pay Eleanor a visit. One Saturday morning, she drove out to Havenwood Haven. The farm was modest, with a weathered barn, a few fenced-in pastures, and a small, cozy farmhouse. Several dogs barked a greeting as Abigail pulled up the driveway. Eleanor emerged from the farmhouse, wiping her hands on a worn apron. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a strong, weathered face and kind, but wary eyes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she wore sturdy work boots and overalls. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked, her voice a little guarded. "Hello, I'm Abigail Peterson," Abigail said, extending her hand. "I'm a teacher at Havenwood Elementary. I heard about your rescue, and I wanted to learn more." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Well, come on in," she said, gesturing towards the farmhouse. "I was just about to make some coffee." The farmhouse kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baking bread. A large ginger cat, much larger than Rusty, was curled up on a chair by the wood-burning stove. As they sat at the kitchen table, Abigail explained her reason for visiting. She told Eleanor about Rusty, about the incident at the school, and about her students' newfound passion for animal welfare. Eleanor listened intently, her initial skepticism slowly melting away. She'd been running Havenwood Haven for almost 10 years, pouring her heart and soul, and most of her savings, into rescuing and rehabilitating abandoned and abused animals. It was a constant struggle, a battle against overwhelming odds. She was often discouraged, feeling like she was fighting a losing battle. "It's hard," Eleanor admitted, her voice laced with weariness. "There are so many animals in need and so few resources. I do what I can, but it's never enough." Abigail nodded sympathetically. "I understand," she said, "but I believe we can help. My students are eager to get involved. They want to do something to make a difference." Eleanor looked at Abigail, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Really?" she asked. "They would want to help?" "Absolutely," Abigail said. "They're already collecting pet food and supplies, and I was hoping perhaps we could arrange a field trip for them to visit Havenwood Haven. They could meet the animals, learn about your work, and maybe even help with some chores." Eleanor hesitated for a moment. She was protective of her animals, wary of exposing them to too much stress. But she also saw the genuine passion in Abigail's eyes, and she knew that this could be a valuable opportunity, not just for the animals, but for the children as well. "All right," Eleanor said, a smile finally spreading across her face. "I'd love to have them. It would be good for the animals and good for the kids." They spent the next hour discussing the details of the field trip, and Abigail learned more about the animals under Eleanor's care. There was Maggie, a sweet-natured Labrador mix who had been found wandering the streets, emaciated and pregnant. There was Shadow, a black cat with a missing eye, who had been rescued from a hoarding situation. There was Charlie, a playful terrier who had been abandoned at the local park. Each animal had a story, a testament to the cruelty and neglect that existed even in a seemingly peaceful town like Havenwood. As Abigail left Havenwood Haven that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had found a way to extend her teaching beyond the classroom, to connect her students with the real world, and to make a tangible difference in the lives of animals in need. And she had found a new friend in Eleanor, a kindred spirit who shared her passion for compassion. The day of the field trip dawned bright and clear. The children were buzzing with excitement, their backpacks filled with snacks and donations for Havenwood Haven. Abigail, standing at the front of the bus, smiled at their enthusiasm. Rusty, now fully recovered and thriving, was safely ensconced in a carrier at her feet, ready to accompany them on their adventure. As the bus pulled up to Havenwood Haven, the children gasped in delight. Dogs barked a welcome, cats peeked from windows, and a few goats grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture. Eleanor greeted them with a warm smile, introducing them to her four-legged residence. The children were immediately captivated. They spent the morning touring the farm, meeting each animal and hearing its story. Mark, surprisingly, bonded with Maggie, the gentle Labrador. He sat beside her for a long time, stroking her soft fur and whispering to her. Sarah connected with Shadow, the one-eyed cat. She gently brushed his fur, marveling at his resilience. Billy, true to his nature, was drawn to all the animals, offering them treats and words of comfort. After the tour, Eleanor put the children to work. They helped clean out stalls, filled water bowls, and brushed the dogs. They worked diligently, their faces glowing with a sense of accomplishment. They were not just learning about animal welfare. They were actively participating in it. During lunch, Abigail brought out Rusty. The children gathered around, eager to see how much he had grown. They took turns holding him, marveling at his playful energy. Rusty, no longer the scared, abandoned kitten, purred contentedly in their arms. The visit culminated in a small ceremony. The children presented Eleanor with the pet food, supplies, and a small amount of money they had raised through a bake sale at school. Eleanor was deeply touched, her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "This means the world to me and to the animals. You have no idea how much this will help." As the bus pulled away from Havenwood Haven, the children were quiet, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. They had learned a valuable lesson that day, a lesson that went far beyond textbooks and tests. They had learned the power of compassion, the importance of empathy, and the joy of making a difference. But the impact of the field trip didn't end there. The children continued to support Havenwood Haven. They organized a car wash, raising even more money for the shelter. They volunteered on weekends, helping with chores and spending time with the animals. They became advocates for animal welfare in their community, educating their families and friends about responsible pet ownership. Mark, inspired by his connection with Maggie, started volunteering at the local animal shelter, walking dogs and cleaning cages. He discovered a hidden talent for working with animals, a sense of calm and purpose he'd never experienced before. Sarah, overcoming her shyness, began speaking out against animal cruelty. She wrote letters to the local newspaper, advocating for stricter animal protection laws. She became a voice for the voiceless. Billy, fueled by his passion, continued to pursue his dream of becoming a veterinarian. He excelled in his science classes, and he started volunteering at a local veterinary clinic, gaining valuable experience. Abigail watched these transformations with pride and joy. She had not only taught her students about compassion, she had empowered them to become compassionate citizens. She had shown them that they could make a difference, that their actions mattered. And as her retirement drew closer, Abigail found herself drawn more and more to Havenwood Haven. She spent her weekends volunteering alongside Eleanor, helping with the animals and offering her support. The two women, bonded by their shared love for animals, developed a deep and lasting friendship. The last day of school arrived, a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. The classroom was decorated with colorful streamers and balloons. The children, dressed in their best clothes, presented Abigail with handmade cards and gifts. The most touching gift was a scrapbook, filled with pictures and stories about the animals they had helped, and their experiences at Havenwood Haven. On the last page, they had all signed their names, along with a promise. We will continue to support Havenwood Haven and all animals in need. We will remember the lessons you taught us, Miss Peterson. Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she read their words. She hugged each child, thanking them for their kindness and their dedication. She knew that she was leaving them in good hands, that they would carry the torch of compassion forward. The farewell party was filled with laughter and tears, memories and goodbyes. Abigail felt a pang of sadness as she said goodbye to her students, to the classroom that had been her second home for 40 years. But she also felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had made a difference. Later that evening, back at her cozy house, Abigail sat by the fireplace, Rusty curled up on her lap. She stroked his soft fur, reflecting on her career, on the countless lives she had touched. She had started her last semester feeling lost and uncertain, but Rusty's arrival had changed everything. He had brought her a renewed sense of purpose, a new chapter in her life. She knew she would continue to volunteer at Havenwood Haven, to support Eleanor and the animals. She had found a new passion, a new way to make a difference. Retirement, she realized, wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The next day, Abigail woke up early, feeling a familiar sense of anticipation. She wasn't going to school, but she was going to Havenwood Haven. She dressed in her comfortable clothes, packed a lunch, and headed out the door. As she drove, she thought about the future. She and Eleanor had been discussing expanding Havenwood Haven, perhaps adding a small education center where they could teach children about animal welfare. It was an ambitious dream, but Abigail was confident that they could make it happen. She arrived at Havenwood Haven, greeted by the familiar sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. Eleanor was already busy, tending to the animals. "Good morning," Abigail said, smiling. "Ready for another day of saving lives?" Eleanor grinned. "Always," she said, "and I'm glad to have you by my side." The two start their day together, a day filled with love for those forgotten animals. A few weeks later, a new school year began at Havenwood Elementary. A new group of fourth graders filed into Miss Peterson's old classroom, their faces filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As they settled into their desks, a small, black kitten darted into the playground. It was a stray, skinny, and scared. But this time, the children reacted differently. Mark's younger brother, now in fourth grade, saw the kitten. He remembered his brother's stories about Rusty and Havenwood Haven. He gently approached the kitten, offering it a piece of his sandwich. Sarah's younger sister, also in the class, joined him. She remembered her sister's passionate advocacy for animal welfare. She suggested they take the kitten to the new teacher. And Billy's younger cousin, inspired by Billy's dream of becoming a veterinarian, volunteered to carry the kitten. The children, remembering the lessons of Miss Abigail Peterson, surrounded the kitten, not with cruelty, but with kindness. They had learned the true meaning of compassion, and they were ready to pass it on. The legacy of Rusty, the little ginger kitten who had been buried and forgotten, lived on, a testament to the power of one teacher's love and the enduring impact of a simple act of kindness. The cycle of compassion continued, rippling outwards, touching countless lives, both human and animal. And in a small, quiet town in Iowa, a little bit of hope was born anew.